Welcome everyone to episode 126 of the Reds Unrestricted podcast. I'm your host, David Comerford, and I'm joined by Chris Coughlin to reflect on Liverpool's 2-2 draw with Arsenal. What an unbelievable game of football that was at Anfield. Arsenal went ahead in the 8th minute through Gabriel Martinelli, and then by the half-hour mark, it was 2-0. It looked like the game was over. It looked like it could only get worse for Liverpool from there, to be honest. But Mohamed Salah pulled one back before half-time, and then 3 minutes before the end of normal time, Roberto Firmino comes off the bench, scores an equaliser, and Liverpool also missed the penalty. They were denied by one of the best saves, if not the best save you'll see this season. And we'll get into all of that over the course of this episode. But Chris, like I say, maybe the busiest episode of the season, certainly one of the busiest in terms of the amount of stuff that we've got to really cover. But we'll start, as we usually do, with our three-eyed match reviews. And it does seem, I think, and maybe you see it differently, but it does seem like there was a clear turning point in that game towards the end of the first half.
Yeah, I'd say I was thinking for 3 words earlier on today, and I was thinking along the lines of, obviously, at half-time or maybe at 2-0, you're thinking more, top 4 gone, that kind of attitude. And to an extent, I still think there is now, even with the draw. But a crazy game. It's just bonkers how it all unfolded, really. I'm aware, obviously, the point that you're referring to. Sometimes teams need a kick to get started, but other parts of the anatomy may also play a part in that. I'm sure. Well, the powers that be will discuss that further. But at 2-0. Really did look like it could have been anything in terms of Arsenal. Just ploughing on, knowing how important the game it was for them. Hear people talk before the game talking about if they'd won at Anfield, would that be the Premier League title pretty much secured for Arsenal with the running coming up, even with having to go to the Etihad, even with having to go to St James's Park. But you saw a real, which has been missing at many points this season. We've said about the home form being top 4 and the away form being mid-table relegation form, but Anfield does crazy things to teams, and when the crowd really gets up and backs the team, strange things, great things do happen. And there was a real backability, real fight today. Obviously, a lot still went against the team, but there were signs that is still knocking about. It's just how to unlock those qualities. So a crazy game. I would have also gone with ups and downs, just given how bonkers the game was as a whole. Because the first half, even walking back from the ground, did irk me a little bit, just thinking about how poor the start was. But a crazy game. I'm sure many people may well see it as a Premier League classic.
Yeah, and you mentioned the top 4 point. For me, it was kind of independent of that in a way. I mean, you look at the maths before this game, for Liverpool to reach the top 4 average, which is 70 points over the last 5 years, they needed to, I think it was, win 9 out of their last 10. So that would be 9 out of their last 9 to get to that point. So really, it is unrealistic at this point. But I think that kind of, in a weird way, as much as it was disheartening, meant I was able to kind of enjoy this game independently of that. And we've been involved in plenty of classics in the Klopp era, but I'm not sure there's any I've kind of been able to kind of appreciate as a game, as a spectacle, as much as this one, really. But yeah, I mean, on this whole thing of the turning point, I have to agree that was what flipped it, because in that first phase of the game, Arsenal were playing right through the heart of Liverpool. The gulf in class was frightening, to be fair. They were winning all the challenges. I mean, they looked stronger. They looked, they had more desire, as well as having kind of the superior game plan, very similar to City in terms of Liverpool's inability to play out from the back. And I thought that was worse than what we saw against Real Madrid, really, because in that game, there was an element of bad luck in the kind of the margin, and it was a little bit deceiving. I mean, Today it was, that was first against the 8 or whatever Liverpool were at kickoff. But it had been billed as this kind of the season-defining test of Arsenal's mettle. Arteta said before the game that Anfield was going to be a jungle. And it felt after half an hour like the stadium was flat, that they were a little bit sort of stunned by the masterclass that they'd seen from Arsenal, which I think that is a fair term to use. But also kind of the fact that it felt off to me at the start. It felt like, especially because of how it had been billed beforehand, as Liverpool kind of conjuring up this kind of Anfield power. It felt off, and it felt like it was going to be, really flat and just peter out and get worse. But then obviously this Xhaka moment is the equivalent, the following season of what happened last year in this game when it was 0-0 and Mane, I think it might have been Tomiyasu or maybe it was White, and he elbowed him a little bit as he went up for a header. Arteta got furious on the sidelines, this big altercation with Klopp. I was at Anfield that day, and the way the game turned, the way the whole feel of the stadium turned after that moment, was palpable. And obviously Liverpool went on to win 4-0 that day. That was the equivalent of it this year. Arteta had tried so hard to contain Anfield. You see the players going down every time there's even a hint of momentum. But Xhaka, unfortunately, the one who does, how much it's fair to criticise him, I'm not sure. But I think, it was kind of out of nothing. The one who has got the previous in terms of being a little bit rash has kind of lit a fire under Anfield today. And I just want to bring up a stat. We'll move on in a second. But I looked up after the game, the stats before and after that 41st minute incident, or maybe a little bit earlier, where both of them got booked. And so beforehand, Liverpool had 4 shots and Arsenal had 5. And in the sort of, it would have been 5 minutes of the first half, full second half and added time. In the time that remained, Liverpool had 17 shots and Arsenal had 4. So it really did completely turn the game on its head. And Arsenal are defending a lead in that spell. But you could just see it with your own eyes, really, and hear it as well, whether you're at the stadium or at home. But let's move on from that anyway. We'll touch on some of the points there a little bit more. But the overriding emotions then, Chris, because like I said at the start, we've seen that save from Ramsdale, Konate almost bundle it in with the last kick of the game, Salah missing a penalty, Nunez got set through one-on-one and missed. Do you feel sort of, are you pleased with the fight back and the point, or are you ruining the fact that Liverpool didn't win, or both?
I'd say both, because after the first half an hour, I think there's more than a legitimate claim to say Arsenal didn't really lay a glove on Liverpool after the first half an hour, and that's the most frustrating thing, because certainly earlier on with the season, all the talk about Liverpool going behind in games, having to fight back and not necessarily doing so. Who you're up against? If you go 2-0 down, it could be to the Rochdale, bottom of League Two. If you go 2-0 down to Rochdale, you've got a fight back on your hands. So going 2-0 down to the Premier League leaders, you can imagine how much of a hill you have to climb when you do that. And it was just so avoidable again. 2 really poor goals to concede defensively. The first one was just panic at the back, and the second, again, I said at half time, I'm not sure the exact point that Liverpool became so bad aerially in defence, but that has been a reoccurring theme ever since the World Cup, especially, but also a little bit before it as well.
Van Dijk's marking thin air as well there, isn't he?
Yeah.
Jesus has just stood behind him. There's no one else for him to worry about. And I don't know if he sees him and then doesn't react, or if he doesn't see him at all. And I don't know which of those is worse. But either way, that was terrible from him.
Yeah, and obviously for both goals, he was culpable. Let's be honest about it. And Robertson, again, he's trying to come across, can't get in there. But afterwards, as I said earlier, you just saw the signs of there is still life in Liverpool. looking at those big chances you mentioned in the second half, I mean, it was funny. Just as Salah put the ball down and took a step back, my brain went, "Wait a minute, he missed a Bournemouth here." And the worst part about the penalty miss, and I think we'll probably, because Klopp's spoken out about that, it's the way it's not the fact he missed it. If it had been saved by Ramsdale, okay. It's the fact that it's the second penalty in a row that's missed the target. That's the big concern here. Nunez, I'll be honest, I didn't have confidence that he'd finish it. Maybe it's because we've seen that happen so often this season, and he needs the consistency in his game to be finishing off those situations. And Canate, again, he's a man that's never scored a Premier League goal, and I think he kind of got a little bit confused as to what to do with it in the end. The chances were there. I also saw Arsenal fans, Martinelli's goal and assist, being frustrated that he couldn't finish off the pass to Saka at the end, and who knows how big a moment that could be in the title race as well. But yeah, I think it's a case of what could have been those chances, because I think Liverpool would have still been 10 points off the top four, even with the game in hand, had they claimed 2 extra points. But ultimately, draws, we've seen it at the top end of the table in the title race, haven't we? That draws do often kill you in the end.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much that happened within
could
this
be an
game.
hour-long podcast. This
it could. I mean, so let's start by looking at the XG. Liverpool 4.76, Arsenal 1.81. Another stat. This is XG philosophy on Twitter, by the way. Liverpool created 1.5 XG more today than they did in the 7-0 win against Man United. I mean, it's one of the highest XG figures I've ever seen for Liverpool, obviously inflated by the fact that there was a penalty in there, which is basically 0.75 in itself. But even still, you earn penalties. They do count for that. I guess you look at that and you're like, that should be a Liverpool win. The point that it was at in the first half, it's like, maybe the draw's good from that standpoint. I mean, it's crazy to think about how the feeling that I had in the first half in terms of this is going to get ugly for Liverpool. Liverpool look nowhere near Arsenal.
Yeah.
This is not the game I anticipated at all. For me to then have that feeling, then be it there at the end, like how on earth have Liverpool not managed to win that game?
Yeah,
is really a sort of marker of how sort of much it turned around, and suppose how much Liverpool did fight back after their poor start. And if we break it down individually, we will come on to the penalty in a second. Nunez, I think Carragher nailed it, to be fair, in commentary. He said, look, there's been patience with Nunez this season. People are focused on the good. He's got 14 goals, I think. And regardless of where we end up this season, I think that's how this season's going to be boxed. It's going to be first season, promising signs, teething problems. But if those moments are still happening next season, then that does become a big problem. And, this season, you mentioned there, Liverpool's still been at 10 points off top four. If he'd missed that chance, it isn't. As when Arsenal missed chances in that game, it's like, is that their season on the line? That wasn't Liverpool's season on the line today when he was going through, but it was a poor finish again. And Neville was saying too that you just don't have confidence in him. It feels like the keeper's the favourite, really.
Has he hit 20 big chances missed yet this season? Without trying to focus on the negative, it was at least 12 to 15 not that long ago. But I think there was a bit of a feeling that he wouldn't necessarily finish it off, and it is a frustration.
Yeah, I'll just check that for you now. Actually, he's on 18. Because Haaland is top of this list with 20 himself, but that's just obviously how much chances he has, and percentage wise, he's still putting a lot of them away. That's the thing; it's okay to miss them as long as you're scoring them. And with Nunez, you just don't have the confidence that you will. The Canate one, I'm not. I mean, it's painful. I think we thought it was going to be a goal, but you watch it back, it is a really awkward height, and I think he's sort of tried to he's almost on his knees trying to chest it into the net. So it's unfortunate, that one, I think. But yeah, let's talk about the penalty, because we're a few hours after the game here. I still don't really know how I feel with it. I think broadly speaking, I feel I feel good about the game, I think. But we'll come on to that again a bit later. So you mentioned there that he missed at Bournemouth, Chris. But that's not the only issue. He's also missed, I had a look, 4 out of 12 since the start of last season. I mean, that's obviously a third of the penalties he's taken. He also missed against Leicester in a game that we lost last year, which was obviously quite an important one. And in the Champions League against AC Milan when we won. So, I mean, that's still an all right conversion rate, but it should be higher than that. I think you're looking at that and you're saying sort of probably you want 10 of those 12 to be scored by your number one penalty taker. So the question naturally is, does Mo Salah need to come off penalties now?
It's tough. I mean, to reiterate what I said earlier, it's the fact that both have missed the target in the same manner. And with the Ramsdale one, the more I look at it, I feel like Ramsdale was expecting to go down the middle because he wasn't really committed to either corner, and then he kind of flung himself to his right in the end. And if it's on target, it goes in because Ramsdale's nowhere near it. I suppose then, when you ask that question, you're then looking at which other regular starter should be on them. I suppose the first one that comes to mind would be Fabinho, given his record for Monaco, given his record for Liverpool as well when relied upon last season.
Did he score? Was it 2 he scored, or was it just one?
Scored against Watford, scored against Shrewsbury. So there were 2 penalties there, which is ironic because the first one I saw him took in a friendly, I think against Torino, he missed it at Anfield Road.
He put that about 5 yards wide, that one, I think.
Yeah. But he's the one. I think Gakpo could take them as well. But Fabinho is probably the one that jumps out as the most reliable if he's to take over from Salah. And I think for Klopp to actively say that he's going to talk to Salah about this is interesting because Milner has spoken recently about giving full responsibility to Salah. And I think we mentioned that after Bournemouth because they were both on the pitch at that point. Milner, of course, wasn't on the pitch today. But I suppose you do have to think about who's going to be the replacements if you're going to take Salah off them. But to miss the target twice in a row is the biggest concern for me, easily.
Yeah. Painful to watch when the keeper goes the wrong way and then you've got so much goal there as well.
Oh,
and he puts it past the post. So this is tricky because if you don't want to end up, remember the situation City were in? I think they missed a ridiculous amount of penalties.
De Bruyne, Mahrez, even Aguero had his shot.
Yeah, they went through a few. You don't want to end up in that kind of position because, if you take penalties off Mo Salah and give them to Fabinho, I mean, that is a lot of pressure for Fabinho on top of the pressure of just taking a penalty generally. It's like, oh yeah, well, you're doing it instead of one of the best players in Liverpool's history now. So you've got to manage the dynamics of it, I think. Look, the record recently isn't good enough, but one thing that might work in our favour is if we can get a couple more penalties before the end of the season, the games may not mean that much from here on out. I mean, we could be talking about competing for sort of 5th to 7th or whatever. That's not incredibly high pressure. Today was higher pressure because of kind of the opponents and the fight back and the atmosphere or things like that. But if you can kind of give Salah some maybe low pressure penalties and he can put a couple of those away, then that maybe gets his confidence back. I think you sort of, I mean, he said he's going to talk to Salah about it. I don't know how that conversation goes because Salah's obviously going to say, look, trust me, I can carry on taking these pens. So I don't know what's the basis for the decision that Klopp's going to make there. Maybe he's going to say to him, why do you think you've missed? What are you going to do differently kind of thing? And maybe it can be constructive from that standpoint. I expect that he'll still back Salah. And that's what I think he does need now. A couple of the problem with penalties, it is kind of self-perpetuating, I think, is when you miss one, the next one becomes harder. It's not just kind of independent of that. So I think, get a couple of get another run together of penalties again, because, as much as that record is poor, up until, I suppose, even that Bournemouth game, it did feel like an automatic goal, to be fair. Just today, I think it was in the back of my mind that he missed his last one, so I was more nervous than I would have been, I think.
That's what I mean. When I said literally, well, as he stepped back, I thought, oh, they're Bournemouth, and then it was just hoping that he would. So just thinking, then, I mean, you get the average people on the street just saying like, oh, it's kicking a ball 12 yards. How hard can it be? Okay, it's kicking a ball 12 yards with broadcast in X amount of countries around the world in front of X amount of people inside a football stadium. It's not that straightforward. Like it takes cojones, if I'm to use a word, and not to go in on Salah. And what I do think is that the next time he takes one, it will be interesting, and it's also worth because there's the new thing now. I'm not entirely sure how it works because there's the new thing where when everyone's crowding the ref, someone else will hold the ball. Then you pop it off to the penalty taker just before he takes it. Surely most players do their homework on who's likely to take a penalty and who isn't. So I do whether someone just goes straight up to Salah next time and starts goading him or whatever, whether he has to live with that. But the next time he takes one, I do think there'll be focus on him. But that's why he's currently the highest paid player in Liverpool's history. To be within pressure moments, and I'm sure he'll be back. I'm sure it won't be long until he scores his next penalty. It's like Harry Kane, look, missing that penalty at the World Cup, and then I think he's been 100% from the spot for Spurs ever since. So players do recover from those situations, and hopefully Salah can.
I was watching Final Score yesterday, and that's the last thing I'll say on this. Tony missed his first penalty for Brentford, and they said in the studio someone else was holding the ball. Jensen had hold of the ball before he took his second, and they thought, oh, are they going to give this penalty to Jensen? So next time we get a penalty, let's maybe have Milner if he's on the pitch, or Fabinho or somebody else holding the ball as if they're going to take it. And then Salah can kind of maybe step up and say, maybe that's something to try. Because there is something, psychological, obviously, when it comes to penalties, and little kind of marginal gains can be key. Well, I want to move on to Trent Alexander-Arnold in a second, because I think he's probably the most fascinating individual from today, even ahead of Salah. Just a reminder before that, though, that you can email us at redsunrestrictedpodcast@gmail.com with any kind of comments about the podcast questions you want us to answer. And we'll be grateful to receive those and definitely get back in touch. And if you are listening on Spotify and you're enjoying the podcast, please do give us a 5-star review. It only takes a second, and we very much appreciate it. And subscribe to the podcast as well, so it appears in your feed. Same applies, obviously, to Apple and any other podcast medium. So, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Chris, what a kind of eventful game for him. I mean, the way I saw it, he had predictable and major problems dealing with Gabriel Martinelli, but something happened for him with that incident. He was either going to get sent off, or it was going to really kind of ignite him. And thankfully it was the latter. And obviously gets the assist right at the end with a wonderful piece of play. And then on top of all of that, kind of, this really eventful game at both ends, he's playing in what looks a little bit like a midfield position. So a lot to get your teeth into there on Trent, I suppose.
I don't know how it came across television. Very first thing that came to my mind, that what's happened to John Stones at Man City, in that he starts at and literally doesn't play there. And I thought it was so strange. It felt like almost a bit of an experiment, to be honest. Because a lot of the talk pre-game was whether Joe Gomez would stay there, and if Joe Gomez did stay there, would Trent Alexander-Arnold play in midfield, and that whole discussion. Because for large spells of this game, they're near right back. It has to be said. Konate was almost having to do the job of right back and centre back at the same time. What a game he had, by the way! Oh, yeah, just an incredible game. I think, rightfully say, there were predictable issues dealing with Gabriel Martinelli. You just have to look at the game of the Emirates about how well Martinelli played against Trent Alexander-Arnold that day. But I think we saw we saw really exciting signs of what Alexander-Arnold can do in a central role, because he just looked really natural there. He looked, the way he was pinging passes, the way he was finding his men, the way he was getting forward. It felt like Alexander-Arnold of the last few years, certainly in terms of going forward. And as well, like a bit of wing trickery. When was the last time that we saw him beat a man like he beat Zinchenko and deliver the ball to the back post? That's what we've seen from Alexander-Arnold in terms of his adventure going forward. It was great to see that again. Of course, there's a lot to look at in terms of, again, the defensive side of his game. It felt like a weird game to see an experiment in, though, didn't it? Like, of all games to experiment for a role like this against the league leaders. I mean, it worked to an extent.
It was really kind of interesting and I think unexpected. You know, Farrell and I were on here pre-match talking about how we thought Gomez should start. And the thing with Trent, you know, we kind of foresaw the difficulties with Martinelli, I suppose. The thing with Trent is when Liverpool were at their best, it was, you know, he had his good games defensively, but if we're being honest, broadly speaking, he does so much going forward. He's doing so little defending that you can kind of minimize those weaknesses because it is a weakness and, you know, maximize the strengths. Today, the role, I think, still didn't quite do that. You know, it was still a problem at the back, obviously, certainly for that second Arsenal goal. But you definitely saw more from him going forward. And if that's connected to the kind of to the role change, then that's definitely something to be explored because we have seen obviously a decrease in production from Trent in that side of the game. The thing that frustrated me with the whole sort of role change was you've got like Neville there in commentary saying, you know, why is Klopp doing this? You know, he's only had a few days to train. You're playing against the league leaders, things like that, and you know, that's similar to what you said, Chris, about it being a strange game to try it. But the same people who question Klopp for keeping everything the same and then not getting the results, then criticize him when he does change things. And did we not see that in midweek? I mean, I criticize Klopp for the changes, but again, you know, I'm not maybe someone who has kind of raised this thing about loyalty all the time all season, but you get people who are like, oh, he's too loyal to certain players, and then he takes them out of the team. And you're like, oh, well, what do you do? And it's like, you can't win to a degree. Yeah. And a lot of people have said, you know, let's use these final 10 games to experiment, you know, let's do something useful. And sometimes that doesn't happen, but we saw that today. I think Klopp said something in the press conference about he's done this before, this kind of role. And we've seen him pop up in these positions, but I don't recall anything like today for such a sustained period. The question now is, was this tactical for today? Or is this kind of where Trent could be playing for the rest of this season? And we'll see, I suppose, in that next game against Leeds in just over a week's time, whether that is going to be the case. Let's talk about a few more individuals quickly before we come on to sort of the last section of the podcast. You've already mentioned Konate. I think he's been one of Liverpool's best players this season. He's not played all that much football, but certainly there's not many who've been better than him, to be fair. Really aggressive today, and that's what the game needed. Just about kept it within the realms of the law too, which is good. I do think he's got a bit of a problem when it comes to jumping out of defence. We saw that against Chelsea a little bit, I think, here at Liverpool today for that first goal. But that, you know, let's be fair, you know, he is still a young player. And is that not a perfect example of kind of maybe slight rashness, I suppose, which is the kind of thing that you do iron out as a defender. But anyone else kind of stand out to you, Chris? Because it was interesting, wasn't it? I was doing player ratings in this game, and after the first 40 minutes, I was looking at 3s, 4s, and 5s. By the end, it's kind of this really broad range where there's a few players kind of pushing on for sort of 7s. So who stood out for you, aside from those couple that we've already mentioned?
Thiago Alcantara took 3 minutes to play better than any Liverpool midfielder has in his absence.
Got to agree, to be fair.
That the outside of the foot ball round the corner, I think it was to Gakpo on the far side, just wonderful. Again, I've heard the argument recently that he slows Liverpool down. It's never an argument that I've been interested in getting involved in, because I just do not agree with it at all. I understand article at times, but when you've got a player of his ability and vision, you've just got to accept that. And again, he's been a massive miss because he hasn't been available an awful lot this season, but he's just a wizard. He's just absolutely wonderful. But I do genuinely mean that as well at the same time about taking 3 minutes. As well, saying Henderson got an assist and a pre-assist. I thought he was better than he has been recently today. It's good not to have to give a shout out to Alisson for once. Given how busy he's been recently. But now, if I'm to point out one more person, it would be Thiago. But also, how many more goals Roberto Firmino is going to score in a Liverpool shirt. So to say I might have, it might be the last Roberto Firmino goal I see live personally. So that was a great moment. Hopefully it won't be his last for Liverpool, but it might be the first. Might be the last I see live. So just a shout out, of course, to Cisenio.
Yeah, definitely, and with kind of playing time as well, you don't know. You'd like to think he would get a couple more, but it's far from certain. And if that is to be the one he signs off with, then that would be kind of a great one, you'd have to say. Hopefully, it's not a kind of Steven Gerrard type thing where it's in sort of a 6-1 defeat or something. But who knows with this Liverpool team this season? I suppose Southampton trying to stay up on the final day.
His favourite opponents as well. 11 Premier League goals against Arsenal.
Yeah, it was going to be him.
They'll be glad to see the back of him.
It's going to be him or Jota, I suppose.
Yes.
I thought Firmino was brilliant when he came on. Just generally, to be fair, loads of good moments from him. There was that. I think one of the first things he did was kind of touch the ball around the corner, leading to the chance for Nunez. And one other player who I've not really seen getting any praise is Jota, and he came off after 60 minutes, and his goal drought will now officially go beyond the year. But he puts in he's instrumental in the first goal. I think he plays a part in the build-up twice there. I think he plays the cut back to Henderson, and he's involved earlier on. He wins the penalty as well. And there was also an important clearance that he made right at the start. I think, when Martinelli goes around trying to get to the byline, comes into the 6-yard box, Jota's back there, clears it. I think it hits someone, but, he potentially prevents a goal there. So what do you say about your forwards? If they can't score themselves, affect the game in other ways, and he did that multiple times today. So credit to Diogo Jota, which he certainly needs at the moment, because obviously not going for him in front of goal, but still, helped this side out today. Right, coming towards the end now, Chris. The one I wanted to ask about Liverpool's record at Anfield. Still only one defeat in the Premier League this season on home, so that was against Leeds. But we've not lost in front of fans at home to a Big Six team since January 2016 when we played Man United. That's in the Premier League, by the way, as well. I mean, it's like we touched on at the start with Arteta referring to it as a jungle. It says a lot that this stadium has retained so much power this season, in spite of how poor Liverpool have been, doesn't it?
Yeah. Meslier made 9 saves in that game as well. So could well have been unbeaten. Yeah, I remember that game. It's a Rooney winner.
It was. Quite late.
Yes, unfortunately, I was watching it in a bar with some of my Manchester United friends at university, which was a fun experience. As I said earlier, Anfield does strange things. Just tell Barcelona that. Dortmund that. City, or everyone, most teams down the years, probably Real Madrid fans would say, but most teams experience a tough time at Anfield. It was a bear pit today. It really, really was. Admittedly, in the first half hour, and for the first half hour, I have to say, Arsenal fans were some of the best I've ever seen at Anfield. As well, I will say massive, massive thanks and credit to Arsenal fans for an impeccably observed minute silence and remembrance of the Hillsborough disaster, because a year on from experiences I've had at a football game where such silence was not observed correctly, it was wonderful. You could have heard a pin drop. Arsenal fans, at that travelling end, massive credit to them, because they're a credit to their club. They really, really were today. Players sense it as well when the crowd gets up, and I think they know that with the crowd behind them, there's always a chance. And yes, it hasn't happened this season in terms of the season as a whole, but as I mentioned earlier, the home form's top 4 form, and just end the season well. Still got 9 games to go. End it well and see how it goes in the next season. Whatever form of European football that may be, if European football at all. But of course, Anfield will always be, a bear pit one way or another.
Yeah, look, you got people on social media who question this atmosphere. I mean, and the power of this stadium. I don't know how much more evidence they need to drop that. The one final thing we absolutely have to discuss before we finish up, and we can't overlook it, is the linesman elbowing Andy Robertson in one of, it's funny with football, we all watch so many games, so many seasons, but every so often something happens that you've just never ever seen before. I mean, what did you think of that? I mean, have you seen any kind of further details about it and what might have happened? Because I think we're all still a bit sort of shocked by what happened there.
I'll be honest, at the time, I didn't have a clue what was happening, because the whistle had just blown. I was kind of composing my thoughts. I didn't look. I wasn't looking at the pitch, and then I see a bit of a kick-off, certainly with the players surrounding the officials. I've seen obviously the footage on Sky. We only get the replays, don't we? The very and it was very zoomed in. There's an undeniable movement of the arm. I have to say, there is an undeniable movement of the arm. That's a get off me motion, whether Robertson has maybe touched his arm to request to speak to him, and he's just said, get off me or whatever. We don't know. I haven't seen anything more on it. I know Klopp said he hasn't seen the incident, or he said afterwards he hadn't specifically seen it. The PGMOL, of course, made a statement. So I think I'd imagine we'll hear more of it pretty soon. I can't say without knowing the full details, to be honest. But Robertson clearly knows what he felt about it.
Yeah, it's funny. We're talking about it like it's a VAR handball decision, but that's how they might analyze it. All right, very final word then, Chris. Final thing of the podcast. In terms of concluding and looking forward now, do we take heart from this game? Because it was a brilliant fight back, but we have seen obviously Liverpool struggle badly in the first 30 minutes, and we've seen how Liverpool have kind of maybe had problems motivating themselves for games that aren't big games at Anfield this season. So I suppose, how much cause for optimism is there for the rest of this season, and maybe latterly next season as well?
I think the reputation the Liverpool have of good finishes to the campaign under Jurgen Klopp will hopefully ring true again. Though as you mentioned, in terms of getting anywhere near Champions League qualification points, and that's relying everybody else to mess up as well. Perfection is required. Final 9 games. If that happens, Liverpool would finish. I still think, even with 9 points out of 9, it would feel a bit too far out of reach in terms of asking the likes of Spurs, Tottenham, United Spurs and Tottenham, Newcastle, Tottenham, and United to drop off. Of course, Brighton as well. I mean, we all know how hard done by they were on Saturday. Yeah. One final thing I have to say, because I didn't mention it earlier on. Save from Salah, the best save I've seen live in terms of just clawing it out of the air. And look, if they win the title by a point, it'll go down as save of the season. Got to credit where credit's due. I didn't even see until afterwards it took a little bit of a deflection at the end, which made it an even better save. But it's a staggering save. But for Liverpool as a whole, just try and end the season well and go into the summer with a feel-good feeling. I think that's fair to say, isn't it, lad?
Absolutely. On the save, that, I mean, I wouldn't say I rate Ramsdale as one of the top goalkeepers, but that save was much better than the one he made against Leicester last season. I had everybody sort of stunned. That I got to hold my hands up and say that was just a ridiculous save. And we'll see what kind of ramifications it has. Like you say, in terms of the Premier League title race, and hopefully next season, this fixture, because if Arsenal are here to stay at the top, and that remains to be seen, hopefully this fixture is kind of as charged as it was for the last 60 minutes, but it's because it's kind of got Premier League title ramifications for both teams, not just one of them. Liverpool will be back in action against Leeds on the Monday Night Football a week tomorrow. Leeds having just lost 5-1 against Crystal Palace. So I wonder how that one will go after Liverpool battered the team top of the Premier League for about 60 minutes today. It's maybe aligning a little bit for a Liverpool special there. You'd have to say, but let's not be too pessimistic about that one. We'll see what happens at Ellen Road. In the meantime, I think I'm going to just go and have some Easter eggs, try and wind down after that unbelievable game. And we'll see you. We'll see you after Leeds. Just one quick last thing before we go. If you are watching on YouTube, please do like the video, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. But we'll be back in a week or so's time after that game against Leeds. But until then, take care.